Secrets According to Humphrey, Chapter 9. Secret Games and Scary Ghosts. For the rest of the week, Room 26 seemed out of control. The groups made progress on their projects. The trader's boat began to look a little bit like a real boat. The paintings on the artist's jars started to look like animals. The builder's pyramid only collapsed 2 more times, but the scribes argued a lot about their hieroglyphics. "We need a frog," Phoebe insisted. "Boing, boing," Og agreed. "If we have a frog, we need a hamster," Thomas said. Daniel disagreed. "A hamster's too hard to draw." "You need to try, I told them. No one was listening, and Mrs. Brisbane, who was always in control of our class, was a little bit confused. "Phoebe, are you raising your hand?" she asked as Phoebe and Kelsey exchanged secret signals. "Rosie, do you need some help?" she asked when Sophie touched her shoulders to signal Rosie. And when Philippe and small Paul spread their arms out like wings, Mrs. Brisbane said, "Boys, be careful." "Mrs. Brisbane, those are secret signals for secret clubs," I told her. Of course, she couldn't understand me. Then there were those other secrets. Miss Matt came to visit again one afternoon. She didn't have much to say. She sat next to the table and stared at me. "What do you want?" I asked her. "If you don't mind me saying so, it's not polite to stare." Miss Mack sighed. "Oh, Humphrey, I'm having so much trouble deciding on a classroom pet for room 12. "Let me help," I said. But of course she had no idea what I was squeaking. And there was Aldo. He came in to clean every night, and he did a great job. But he also complained about his secret. "Mamma mia," he said one night, "this good news is hard to keep secret, but a promise is a promise." "You know I won't tell anyone," I said, which was true because humans can't understand me anyway, and neither will Og. "Boing, boing, boing," my neighbor agreed. But Aldo didn't share his secret. It's a very good thing to be able to keep a secret, but it's a very bad thing to know that someone has a secret that he won't share. I was glad when Friday finally arrived, and I think Mrs. Brisbane was happy as well. "Who is taking Humphrey home?" she asked. Tall Paul waved his hand. He looked unsqueakably happy. "Sorry to leave you here alone," I squeaked to Og as Tall Paul carried me out of room 26. I heard a distant boing boing as the door closed behind us. Tall Paul is by far the tallest student in room 26. He's almost as tall as Mrs. Brisbane. In fact, he's almost as tall as Principal Morales. So I was unsqueakably surprised when I got to his house and discovered that compared with the rest of the Green family, he wasn't tall at all. In fact, he looked short. This was one tall family. It was like being surrounded by giants, at least to a short hamster like me. But they were very friendly giants, and I was happy that they didn't have any gigantic pets. In the evening, Tall Paul and his tall parents sat by my cage, so I put on a show for them. First, I spun on my wheel. Then I hopped off and climbed up the side of my cage through the top. Next, I climbed down my tree branch, back to the wheel, and started spinning again. "Watching Humphrey is much better than watching TV," Mrs. Green said. Mr. Green agreed. "It's like watching a one-hamster circus." They were friendly and smart giants. "I told you he was fun," Paul said. "So can I get a hamster now?" "Let's see how the weekend goes," his father answered. I thought it would be wonderful if Paul got a hamster. I decided I'd do everything I could to prove that hamsters make positively wonderful pets. The next day, Paul's mom asked if he wanted to invite some friends over. "Paul Fletcher," Tall Paul quickly answered, "and Philippe." "I'll call them," Mrs. Green said. "And who else?" "How about Thomas?" Tall Paul thought for a few seconds and then shook his head. "No, just Paul F. and Philippe." "I thought you were friends with Thomas, too," his mom said. "And Joey." "I am," Paul hesitated. "But this time I just want Paul and Philippe to come over." Mrs. Green looked puzzled, but she didn't say anything more. She left and came back a few minutes later to say that Paul F.'s mother would bring both boys to the house. When small Paul and Philippe arrived, they came into the bedroom and Tall Paul closed the door. "My mom wanted me to invite Thomas and Joey too," Tall Paul said, "but I talked her out of it. If they came, we couldn't do our secret club things." "Oh, I almost forgot," small Paul said. He spread his arms like wings, and so did Tall Paul and Philippe. "Bada wada fada." they all chanted. I don't think it was really Egyptian. I think it was something they made up. Flying pharaohs forever, they added, and they bowed to each other. Then they acted normal again. So this is our first real meeting, Tall Paul said. What do you want to do? Philippe shrugged. I don't know. Something pharaohs would do, I guess. I have an idea, Tall Paul said. I was reading about ancient Egypt, and they played one of the earliest board games. Cool, Small Paul said. What did it look like? Soon the friends were on Paul Green's computer. There it is, Tall Paul said. It's called Sonnet. They even found games in some pharaohs' tombs. I bet I could make one of those, Fix-It Philippe said. There wasn't much he couldn't build. Let me see, I squeaked. The boys laughed, but I was feeling very frustrated because I couldn't see the computer screen from my cage. Wow, look at the one they found in King Tut's tomb, Tall Paul exclaimed. It's beautiful. Philippe began to sketch. We'll need a big cardboard box and game pieces, he said. Tall Paul found a box while Small Paul got out some other board games and borrowed the game pieces from them. And little sticks to throw, Small Paul said. How about pencils? Or big paper clips, Tall Paul suggested. Paper clips would work for now, Philippe agreed. The boys also gathered a ruler and markers as Philippe began to make the game board. The path around it looks something like a snake, Small Paul said. Eek! I squeaked. It slipped out when I heard the word snake. I relaxed when I realized he wasn't talking about a real snake. The three friends spent the afternoon making the game and then playing it. I dozed off for a while, but woke up once I heard Paul F. shout, Take that, Tutankhamun. I fell back to sleep until Paul G. shouted, Bad move, Amenhotep. I guessed Amenhotep was another pharaoh. Hey, what about Humphrey? Philippe asked. I'll bet he wants to play. He gently took me out of my cage and set me on the game board. Looked a little bit like an obstacle course. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do, but I saw the game pieces on different squares. Aha! The goal of the game must be to knock them all over. So I scurried from square to square and knocked them down one by one. Every time a game piece fell, the boys laughed. You win, Humphrey, Tall Paul said when all the pieces had fallen. Even the pharaohs never played a game like that. Gee, I'd love to show the game to Mrs. Brisbane, Philippe said as he put me back in the cage. Maybe we'd get extra credit. Tall Paul didn't agree. No, this is a Flying Pharaohs game. We have to keep it a secret. Right, Small Paul said. Everything that happens in the Flying Pharaoh Club is a secret. When Small Paul's mom came to pick the boys up, Tall Paul put the board in a drawer. Don't you tell anyone our secret, Humphrey, he told me, or the ghost of King Tut will come after you. My whiskers wiggled, and my tail twitched. Eek! I squeaked. Oh, Humphrey, I was joking, Tall Paul said. It wasn't a very funny joke, at least to a small creature like me. I scrambled under my bedding, and I stayed there for a long, long, long time. The next day was more fun. Tall Paul showed his parents how much he wanted a hamster by cleaning out my cage and giving me fresh food and water. He took very good care of me, and Mrs. Green was impressed. Then Tall Paul and his dad made an obstacle course on the living room floor, using blocks and books to create barriers. I ran the obstacle course over and over to show Paul's dad how much fun a hamster can be. Even Paul's big sister and his big brother came in to watch. Mr. Green was impressed, and he gave me a lovely slice of apple once I was back in my cage. So can I get a hamster? Paul asked his mom and dad before bedtime. Maybe, they said. Maybe isn't a very good answer, but they were smiling when they said it. After Tall Paul went to bed that night, I thought about all the things I had to tell my friend Og when I got back to room 26. But later, when the room was dark and the house was quiet, I thought I saw the ghost of King Tut in front of my cage. I was too scared to squeak. I raced into my sleeping hut, and I didn't come out until the next morning. Humphrey's top secret scribbles. Kings and their treasures are quite nice, but I don't want to meet the ghost of King Tut.